My name is Abraham Kopec. I was born in 1933, December of 1933, Christmas, in a small town of Goworowo, Poland, near the town of Białystok, not far from Białystok. In 1939, when I was about 5.5 years old, not quite 6, the Germans came into our town. They chased all the Jewish people out into the street, burned our houses, and lined us up in front of a machine gun and to want to shoot us all. Then one of the top commanders came in and said that that's too many people to kill at one time. Of course, that was in 1939. Things were not quite as brutal as in 1941 or 42. Finally, they dispersed us into fields. My father was able to hire a man with a wagon to take us to the Russian sector of Poland, which was Białystok. When we came there, we were living, they gave us quarters in a resort area, which the communists confiscated from the other people. And we lived there for 6 months. Us included me, my father, my mother, my aunt. I had an aunt and an uncle, and their 2 children too. And my grandmother was still alive, and from my mother's side, and also my grandfather and grandmother of my father's side. We lived in Poland approximately 9 months. In June of 1940, the Russians came and loaded us into cattle cars on a train, and they shipped us. We traveled 4 weeks by train to Siberia. When we got there, we lived in like army type of barracks. They were constructed out of wood. We lived there for about a year. And my mother died. She had heart problems. And me and my sister, my father couldn't take care of us. We had to go to an orphanage. And we stayed in an orphanage for approximate 4 years, 4.5 years, until 1946, the first part of 46. First, we were in an orphanage in Russia near, trying to think, the town was Michurinsk, which was central Russia. Then, after the war was over, we were in an orphanage in Poland for a couple months. And then my uncle came and got us.
Can you tell us what those 9 months were like while you lived in hiding in Poland as a 5-year-old?
Well, in Poland, see, when we lived in Poland during the Russian occupation, things were rough, very badly, but it wasn't, people were dying more of hunger and hunger and disease, but not really being killed. See, the only people that ever got killed in Russia were those who were sent to labor camps in Siberia, which we were not in a labor camp. We were more in a just in a rural area, more or less. We were not in a labor camp. See, my father had to work, but we didn't have any armed guards, because the reason we were sent there is because my father refused to take Russian citizenship. So they considered us nuisance, you know, not really citizens. So it's more of a nuisance deal. So they just left us alone. They didn't commit no big crimes as far as the communist system was concerned at that particular time. We didn't do any major, like spoke against the government or try to do any espionage or whatever any subversive activities. So that's the reason, was the only part that was bad is the couple weeks that we lived under the Germans. I don't know if it's 3 or 4 weeks before we were able to get out of there from eastern Poland, because they caught you, they either shot you or just killed you.
And how did you get out?
Well, my father was able to see, when the war started, there was a lot of commotion still. It was disorganized, I assume. Of course, I don't remember the exact details, but I understand how things worked in a new system. And there was a lot of commotion, and my father was able to get some guy, he was able to hire a farmer just to transport him. We weren't very far. I think it was about either 50 or 70 miles from the border. He was able to he transported us to the Russian sector.
And who did he transport with you?
Oh, it was me, my sister. I got a sister that's 3 years younger than me. And my father, my mother, and my grandmother, my mother's mother, and my aunt and uncle and their children, and my grandfather from my father's side, and my grandmother. We were like 12 people probably. So we were able to get transported, from that side to the other side. Once we were in the Russian sector of Poland, we were more or less safe as far as being killed.
Together?
Yes, we were all together. We traveled. Most of that time, I think we traveled at night, if I'm not mistaken. So, and at that time, that particular part of since the Russian occupied part of Poland, I don't think the Germans were messing with that part of the territory. It was close to the Russian border, which were their allies at that particular time. Germany and Russia were allies temporarily for about a year or so, a year and a half.
What was your life like when you got to the other side? Do you remember?
Well, things were really rough. Because food was very scarce, and food was very rationed. And as a kid, when you're rationing the food, you only think about food. And that's part I remember. I always remember being hungry. That's one part I remember, always being hungry. Because when I was in the orphanage, we used to get if I'm not mistaken, we used to get like a quarter pound of bread a day. I think 250 ounces. So it was a 200 ounces, 200 gram or 250 gram. I don't recall. And it never seem to be enough, There never was a loaf on the table. They just rationed you exactly small portion. And but somehow we managed to survive.
Did you have any kind of a Jewish life during
No, I had no Jewish life at all. As a matter of fact, when I was in orphanage, I was strictly between all the children were Catholics. Because I was with a lot of Polish kids, and they were all Catholic, basically. The percentage of Jewish kids was very minimal. And I knew I was Jewish. My sister knew we were Jewish, but we had no Jewish education or upbringing at all until I was when I got out of orphanage in 46, till I was about 12, 13 years old. I had no Jewish education whatsoever, or any knowledge of any. Because when the war started, I haven't started Hebrew school. I was about to start Hebrew school. And it just, when the war started, I didn't go. I didn't go. I was supposed to enter Hebrew school that particular year. After the holidays or something, I can't recall what was the deal. And I never had any Jewish education till I was 13.
Tell us about liberation.
Well, we were really, when we heard the war was over, it was the greatest celebration in the world, you know. But we were not, you know, enslaved. We were not enslaved in a concentration camp or anything like that. So really, it wasn't as like the people who were liberated from a concentration camp. You know, it's just the joy of the war being over more than anything else.
So what happened after you left the orphanage? What happened from that point on?
Well, my uncle came and got us, and we went to Western Poland where they lived. He traveled to Western Poland, and from there we smuggled through the...
Now, with you and your sister?
Yeah, me and my sister. We were all smuggling through. There were some Jewish people that were helping all the other Jewish people to get out of Poland. And that's the way they used to do it, is they used to assemble close to the border and at night. And they used to bribe the guards. And we used to go to the Czech, from Poland to Czechoslovakia. When we got there, somehow the Czech government permitted us to travel through Czechoslovakia, even if we didn't have any money. He permitted us to travel with trains to Czechoslovakia, to Germany, to Austria. And when we came to Austria, the Federation helped us to get into Germany. I assume it was the Federation.
So it still was pretty scary in Poland, even after the war then?
Well, there were a lot of that anti-Semitism existed in Poland, even after the war. You know, it didn't diminish. I mean, you know, it's just some of them got more power after the war because they blamed the Jewish people for everything, for the war, for their problems, for everything. So a lot of Jewish people were blamed for all that, regardless.
And then how did you decide to come to the United States? Or you were still a child, but how did
Well,
you come?
my parents, we either was going to go, we had papers to go to Australia if we couldn't be granted a visa. We had some papers. We had some relatives in Australia. My father did, and he sent them some papers. So we did have some papers to go to Australia in case we weren't able to come here. But somehow we were able to come here, so we didn't go to Australia. But we would have probably ended up in Australia if we couldn't come here.
And was there a particular reason why you came here?
No, we had some relatives here. We had some relatives here.
In Kansas City?
No. My uncle lived in Chicago, and my father had an uncle in Providence and some other places. So, you know, we did have some relatives in here before the war.
And how old were you when you got to the United States?
Oh, I was in 1950. I was 16 years old already when I came here.
Of the people that went across the other side with you, those 12 people you told us about, How many of them survived and came over to America?
Oh, the only one survived is my father survived, and my aunt and uncle and my cousins and me and my sister. My grandparents died, and my mother died, and one of my cousins died. So just about almost half of them. Four. We were 12, I think. For about 33%, 40%, 33. About 4 or 5 of them died before they came here.
What was your impression of the United States as a child, as a 16-year-old?
Well, I never seen nothing like it. I've been to Europe. That was all destructed. So there's like going from here to Mars. I mean, you know, you don't see that. Even when we lived in Germany, it was all, when we got to Germany, it was all ruins. Was nothing, you know, it looked like this paradise.